Okay, in this lecture, I'm going to introduce you to a very important topic, procedural programming. So what is this all about? Well, procedural programming is a programming paradigm based on procedure calls. So by procedure, I mean function, method, routine, subroutine. These are all the same thing. So far, all the code you have written in your exercises was in the main method, but that's not how we build real-world applications. Because a real-world application includes quite a number of functionalities, and writing all that code inside the main method is going to be a disaster. So we need to break down our code into a number of methods or functions, each responsible for one thing. And this is what we call procedural programming. We also have object-oriented programming, which is another programming paradigm which is based on objects. So instead of thinking in methods and functions, we think in objects. And that's the topic of the second part of this course. But for now, because we want to take things on a step-by-step fashion, I want to make sure that you really understand procedural programming. And the best way to understand that is by doing it. So, in this lecture, I'm going to show you how I would go about extracting some logic from the main method into a separate method. I'm going to do a couple of examples, so I want you to pay full attention. And once you see how I do it, then I want you to go over the code you have written in this section for the exercises and apply this technique. If you couldn't solve all the exercises, that's okay, don't worry. You can look at my solutions and extract methods from the code I have written. So let's flip over to Visual Studio and see procedural programming in practice. Okay, this is the solution to one of the exercises we had earlier in this course. We asked the user to type their name, and then we reverse the name using an array. So currently everything is written in the main method. How can we extract a method or a function from this logic? The first rule of thumb: you should always separate the code that works with the console from the code that implements some logic. So in this example, over the first two lines, we get the user's name. Then here we have some business logic, which is where we use an array to reverse the name. And here is where we return the reverse name as a string. And finally, we display the result on the console. So let me put a line break here. So this last line and the first two lines is all about working with console. We want to make sure that we separate this logic from the logic that is responsible for calculating the reverse of a name. Why? Because in the real world, we have different presentation technologies. We have desktop applications, web applications, mobile apps, and there we don't have console. So by extracting this logic here that is highlighted into a separate method, we can reuse that method in any application. Console is only relevant in console applications. So let's extract this logic into a separate method. First, we start with the access modifier, public. Then we need to use the static keyword. And the reason for that is because we are in the main method and main is a static. In order for us to call this method from the main method, this method should be static as well. Now we need the return type. What do you think is the best return type for this method? Should it return an array or a string? Well, what do we expect here? We need a string to display on the console. So return type is going to be a string. Now give it a name, reverse name. Make sure your method names are meaningful. I should be able to look at your method name and know exactly what this method is doing without looking at its code. Now, parameters. Do we need any parameters? If yes, how many? Of what type? Well, all this method needs is that initial name, this variable here. So all the processing is done on the name variable, which is a string. So this method should take a string parameter called name and return another string, which is the reversed version of that name. Now, I simply cut and paste this code here. In the last line, we need to return reversed variable. Okay? And now we can change our main method such that We call our new method reverse name and pass this name here and display the result. So look, the code is more maintainable now. Instead of everything being in the main method, we have two methods, each responsible for one thing. The main method is purely responsible for getting the input from the user and displaying it. And the reverse name method is purely responsible for reversing the name. Now, one more improvement we can do here is this variable here, reversed. I see that as a bit of noise because the name of this method, reverse name, is telling me that what is coming out of this method is the reverse name. So we don't need to store it in a separate variable. We can simply get rid of it and return the result straight away. And this way, the method is shorter and easier to understand. Let's take a look at another example. Okay, here is the solution to another exercise in this course. So we ask the user to continuously enter a number or type quit to exit. Then from that list of numbers, we find the unique numbers and finally display them here. So what part of this code can we extract into a separate method? Again, remember my rule of thumb. You need to separate what is about working with console from what is about the logic of your application. So in this case, this is the core logic. Getting the list of unique numbers from a list. So I'm going to extract this into a separate method. Public, static. What should be the return type of this method? It should return a list of integers. Now we give it a name, get unique numbers. Now what should be the parameter? List of integer. Let's call it numbers. And now we can cut and paste this here. So finally, we return this Unix variable here, which is a list of integers. And in the main method, we can assign this variable to a call to get unique numbers of numbers. That's one way. Another way is, because this is kind of a noise, we can simply call this method inside the for each block. Okay, so now we have a reusable method that we can use anywhere, anytime, where we have a list of numbers and we want to get the list of unique numbers in that list. Now it's your turn. I want you to go over the exercises in the string section, the ones you did just before this lecture, and extract methods or functions or procedures from your code. If you get stuck, you can always look at my solutions.